This video will contain spoilers for Jujutsu Kaisen chapters 73, 74, and 75, Season 2, Episode 4, otherwise known as Episode 28, and Jujutsu Kaisen 0, the movie. So the new season of Jujutsu Kaisen has started, and in this series, I'm going to be analyzing the story of the series as it airs, and, as a manga reader, comparing the anime to the manga to see what they pulled over directly, what they modified or expanded, and what they just straight up removed. So let's begin with the 4th episode of Season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen. First, I'll recap the plot and explain what chapters it covered. We pick up with Fushiguro explaining that due to the nature of Tengen-sama's barriers, you can't post guards outside the entrance to their location, but that means as long as you know where to go, it's very easy to enter. He also explains that due to it being a busy time of year, the school is probably underpopulated, and with his fly heads causing a distraction upstairs and his lack of cursed energy, he's basically invisible. However, if he were to use a cursed tool, its cursed energy would negate his invisibility, so he resorted to using a basic pistol to kill Riko so he could approach undetected. Geto doesn't respond at all and instead sends his dragon to attack, with Fushiguro firing away at him. Geto uses a squid curse we saw him use to break the window he jumps out of in episode 25 to stop the bullets. Fushiguro discards his gun and continues explaining. He tells Geto that he has a cursed spirit that can hold objects that he uses to store his tools, but usually its presence would make him detectable. He makes himself regurgitate it and explains that he can make it shrink down by having it store its own body inside of itself, and then he swallows it. While the spirit is inside his stomach, its cursed energy is hidden inside his own lack of cursed energy, allowing him to move through barriers undetected while keeping his cursed tools. He mentions that his initial blade used against Gojo was not a cursed tool, so he could achieve a surprise attack on the Six Eyes that can see cursed energy. As Fushiguro arms himself with a weapon from his storage spirit, Geto angrily cuts him off. Geto states that he understands Fushiguro's heavenly restriction, physical prowess, and that he's revealing all this information to enhance his technique, or lack thereof. But what he wants to know is how he found the entrance to the tombs if they were careful not to leave any residual cursed energy behind. Fushiguro tells him that humans leave behind more than just cursed energy, things like odor and footprints, and that because of his heavenly restriction, his senses are extremely sharp. Geto finishes up by asking about Kuroi, and Fushiguro simply states that she may or may not be dead, because he dealt with her but didn't care either way what happened to her. With that, Geto decides he's heard all he wants to know and once again reiterates his desire to ban Fushiguro from the server known as Real Life. He sticks his dragon spirit on him, but Fushiguro does one of those cool falling slices along the length of the dragon that you see anime characters do and destroys it. Geto is surprised he was able to cut it, as we learn this particular spirit is called the Rainbow Dragon, and that it has the hardest skin of all of his spirits. While Fushiguro scoffs at Geto's technique, he's caught off guard by the other spirit Geto summoned. The spirit reveals part of her face and asks Fushiguro if he thinks she's pretty. Fushiguro immediately recognizes the spirit as an imaginary vengeful spirit with an innate domain that forces a victim into a pact that cannot be broken until the question is answered. This particular spirit is actually meant to be Kuchisake Onna, a well-known onryo in Japanese culture, which I'll go into more depth about in the analysis portion of the video. Fushiguro responds to the question by telling the spirit she's not his type, and she conjures a pair of shears that create unseen pairs of shears of varying sizes, targeting different parts of Fushiguro's body. Realizing this, he deftly deflects all of them away from him in an instant, shocking the spirit. Geto takes advantage of Fushiguro's distraction to close the gap, which Fushiguro notices and thinks he's stupid for attempting since Geto stands no chance in close quarters against him. Fushiguro states that this is the end, but Geto shoots back that it's actually the end for him, as he attempts to steal his storage spirit away from him with curse manipulation, which surprises Fushiguro. We get an explanation about curse manipulation, which explains that if the difference in power between the curse user and the target spirit is 2 levels or greater, the curse user can take in the spirit with practically 0 conditions attached, and we're shown that Geto is against the border between 1st grade and special grade, while Fushiguro's storage spirit is a 3rd grade. Geto thinks that while Fushiguro's physical ability is powerful, he can take his weapons cache and negate some of the difference to engage him in physical combat. However, as he thinks this, his absorption of the storage spirit is rejected. Fushiguro uses it and his other blade royally mess up Geto as well. Fushiguro states that since Geto is a sorcerer, he'll be able to survive this attack. He states that if Geto were a Shikigami user, he would have killed him. But because he doesn't know what will happen with his spirits from curse manipulation and doesn't want to deal with whatever would happen, he'll leave Geto alive and tells him to thank his parents. However, he rubs it in that for all their blessed talents, both Gojo and him lost to a monkey like him that can't use Jujutsu at all. As he stores his weapon, he tells Geto to remember that, effectively saying that he should be less arrogant, if he wants to live a long life. Suddenly, he remembers that he named his son Megumi, which means blessings, and Gojo twitches. We cut to the Star Religious Group headquarters, and Fushiguro drops off the corpse of Riko. The representative he speaks to is pleased and says they'll include some extra in the payment for his troubles. Fushiguro thanks him, calling him a founding father, while the suited man is surprised considering he thinks the group helped him more than he helped them, while also correcting Fushiguro that the man he's speaking to isn't one of the founders. The representative explains that they assumed he would fail, then goes into an explanation of the history of the Star Religious Group. They started in the Nara period, which in 2006 would have been about 1200 to 1300 years prior, when Tengen-sama was traveling Japan preaching Buddhism and the morality of Jujutsu sorcerers. The Time Vessel Association came about when the worlds of Jujutsu and religion diverged, which led the Time Vessel Association to ensure their ranks were always composed of non-curse users, as even the highest-ranked, most free Jujutsu sorcerers aren't allowed to attack non-curse users. This is an important thing to make note of for later. As they knew the merger was coming, they hatched a plan of desperation, knowing that if they acted themselves, the sorcerers would suspend their non-curse user clause and destroy them, but if they were to allow the merger to go through, then the association would fall apart. The representative states that the euphoria of successfully stopping the merger loosened their purse strings, while the suited man reminds him that if Tengen-sama goes berserk, it probably means the end of humanity. The representative responds that the stance of the religious group is that if they were to fall alongside Tengen-sama, they accept that risk. Fushiguro makes fun of the man with a gesture as he walks away, then asks the suited man if he meant Okinawa when he mentioned the association helping him. The suited man confirms, revealing that Fushiguro is the one who kidnapped her, which is why she didn't even remember it given his speed. He explains that usually you'd use a car to transport a hostage since public transportation is risky, but the head of the association owns a private jet they use to transport Kudoi to Okinawa, stating that rich people just think differently. Fushiguro asks the suited man to show him a nice restaurant he uses to butter up his clients, but the suited man denies him, knowing he doesn't plan on paying. He says he promised himself only to associate with Fushiguro in business or in hell, as they go their separate ways. As Fushiguro is leaving the compound, suddenly, Gojo. Shocked, Fushiguro can only muster a "for real?" as Gojo reveals his healed wounds. Fushiguro realizes he mastered reverse curse technique, and Gojo explains that he gave up on fighting back when Fushiguro stabbed him in the neck and put all of his energy into reverse curse technique. Gojo begins rambling about how he figured out reverse curse technique, and says that Fushiguro lost when he didn't cut Gojo's head off or stab it with the inverted spear of heaven. Fushiguro equips said weapon, stating the battle's just started, and rushes Gojo. Gojo launches himself away from Fushiguro at a speed that surprises him, and as he's upside down in the air, he finally manages to pull off a curse technique reversal red. The overwhelming force generated by the outpouring of positive energy launches Fushiguro all the way into the roof of the Time Vessel Association HQ, although he seems to have only taken a slight wound to the head. Looking at Gojo, he calls him a monster. Getting up, Fushiguro tests to see if any of his bones are broken. He notes that he just witnessed the curse technique reversal of Limitless, wondering if it could be considered an energy wave. He takes a mental inventory of the three forms Gojo's technique takes. Infinity is the neutral form of Limitless, the power to stop motion. Blue is the amplified version of Limitless, the power to attract. Red is the reverse version of Limitless, the power to repel. Fushiguro connects the inverted spear of heaven to a chain and begins twirling it, noting that infinity hasn't been an issue from the start. With the extended reach of his chain, blue shouldn't be a problem, and even his speed works if need be in that case, and that as long as he times the counter properly, he can use the spear to negate red as well. As Gojo floats up into view, Fushiguro notices a growing uneasiness when he looks at Gojo. He pushes it away, telling himself everything will be fine, and presses the attack. Gojo thinks back to Riko, apologizing to her that he isn't currently angry for her or vengeful towards Fushiguro in her name, saying that right now, everything just feels right. He spouts some biblical verse at Fushiguro, who whips his weapon across the roof to launch a flechette storm of concrete at Gojo. He launches the spear through the dust cloud and attempts to bring it down on Gojo. Gojo notes that the only issue with techniques passed down through the years is that they have a manual, and most people are aware of them. Even so, Fushiguro would likely have to be from one of the big three sorcerer families. Gojo figures most likely Zenin, given his familiarity with his techniques. That being said, the technique Gojo is about to use is known only to a small few people even within the Gojo family. He combines both the attraction force of blue and the repulsion force of red to usher forth an imaginary mass. Hollow technique, purple. As he does so, Fushiguro thinks about how under normal circumstances, he never would have risked his life like this in a fight he wasn't being paid to engage in. However, he ended up wanting to crush Gojo, the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcerers, to discredit the Jujutsu world and the Zenin family, and this caused him to deviate from his true self. Purple rips most of the left side of his body from him, as well as putting some holes in the HQ building behind him. Fushiguro says he thought he had put aside such petty pride, and had chosen the path of being proud of neither himself nor others. Gojo asks him if he has any last words, and initially Fushiguro says no, but then tells Gojo that in 2 or 3 years his son will be sold off to the Zenin family, and tells Gojo to do as he pleases with him. After the credits, we see as Fushiguro's storage curse makes its way to Geto as it's dying, explaining how he has it in 11 years when the events of the movie happen. He makes his way to the Time Vessel Association headquarters and witnesses as the cultists are clapping while Gojo makes his way through the crowd carrying Riko's corpse. He and Geto have a brief conversation where Gojo tries to assuage Geto's guilt over the situation and asks if he thinks they should kill the cultists. Geto declines, stating that it's only a matter of time before the association dissolves anyway, so there'd be no point. Gojo asks if it's really necessary for there to be a point, and Geto insists that, especially for Jujutsu sorcerers, it's important that there's a point. What we see, however, is how Geto truly feels, as a darkness seems to be taking him over, a growing seed of his disgust with the world, despite his words continuing to cling to his previous espoused ideology. With the recap out of the way, let's review the major points of the episode. 1. Geto and Fushiguro fight, but Geto loses. 2. After Fushiguro drops off Riko's body with the Time Vessel Association, he is confronted by Gojo as he's leaving. 3. Gojo has mastered Reverse Curse technique, and manages to cast both red and purple. 4. Fushiguro loses to Gojo and tells Gojo about Megumi as his last words. Real quick, before we get into analysis, I want to address the programming speculation I put forth in the first video. I found out this week that apparently the schedule for the show is as follows. The first 5 episodes will be the current arc, so we only have one more. Then there will be a 3-week break where the first week will be a recap of either Season 1 or the movie. The second week will be a recap of the one they didn't already do, the other one. And then there's a week that's just a full week off/break with no episode at all. Then, on August 31st, the show will return for the next arc, which will last for another 18 episodes. This was already known at the time I made the video, I just didn't come across the info in any of my searching. So, this is why thorough research is important, kids. Now let's get into some analysis and explanation. The first thing I want to go into is the curses that Geto summoned, Kuchisakayona and the Rainbow Dragon. Fushiguro refers to Kuchisakayona as an imaginary vengeful spirit, which is due to the fact that Kuchisakayona is considered by most in Japan to be an urban legend or folklore tale. Given how curses work in Jujutsu Kaisen, a cursed spirit like Kuchisakayona could be spawned by the collective fears of people targeted towards the legend until enough negative energy was accumulated to create the spirit, much in the same way that Mahito, Jogo, Hanami, and the water spirit we saw in Season 1 were explained by Mahito to have been created by humanity's collective fear of natural things like humanity itself, volcanoes, the ocean, or forests. Traditionally, Kuchisakayona is said to be an onryo, or vengeful spirit, that looks mostly beautiful except for a large slit mouth that scars her face, which she covers with a mask. She appears before people and asks them if they think she's pretty. Saying no results in your death by her scissors or shears, while saying yes causes her to remove her mask and reveal her scars, at which point she asks the question again. If you say yes again, she uses her scissors to give you a slit mouth like her own. If not, then she kills you. There are several beliefs regarding how to survive an encounter with Kuchisake Onna, intact and unscathed. One, for example, is that those who encounter her must respond in unorthodox ways that break the flow of the conversation and take advantage of the confusion to make their escape. Others say you can distract her by throwing candy at her, specifically bekoame, a type of caramelized sugar candy similar to lollipops or, if you could imagine, unflavored Jolly Ranchers, or by shouting pomade, a type of hair gel, 3 times. The legend of Kuchisake Onna is thought to have roots going as far back as the Edo period in Japan, which took place between the 17th and 19th centuries, and Wikipedia shows an artistic depiction of her dating to 1801. However, the legend as it is known today really took off in 1979, when several newspapers across Japan ran articles concerning the legend and it became ingrained in the public consciousness of modern Japan. Kuchisake Onna is also considered to be a type of contemporary yokai, which is often translated into English as demon, but literally translates as strange spirit, and is the term used to refer to the vast collection of strange entities, spirits, gods, or demons that are common in Japanese folklore and religion. Now, for the rainbow dragon, this one is more of a cross-cultural reference, as I couldn't find anything specifically identifying the concept of a rainbow dragon in Japanese mythology, unless you count Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But I did find some information pointing to a rainbow dragon existing in Chinese mythology. Given the history between China and Japan and the cultural interchange between them, there are a lot of Chinese mythological ideas that have found their way into Japan's culture. The main difference is that the dragon existing in Chinese mythology is generally considered to be a 2-headed beast, with 1 head at each end of its body, but the one shown here is obviously only single-headed. More than likely, this is just artistic license taken by Akutami when designing the spirit to make it easier to draw. Next, I want to talk about Gojo's reverse curse technique, and hollow technique. Reverse curse technique was discussed in Season 1 and given a little further info in the movie, but it's given an explicit explanation here. There are also a couple pages from earlier in the manga we can pull from for further explanation on this as well. Basically, by taking 2 sources of cursed energy and multiplying them against each other, their negativity is inverted into positivity, operating on the basic principle of 2 negative numbers being multiplied together, making a positive one. Akutami states that if the basic property of negative energy is to destroy, then the basic property of positive energy is to create. This is why reverse curse technique has the ability to heal people, as we saw Yuta do in the movie and Sukuna do to Itadori in order to bring him back to life. He also makes it clear that what cursed spirits do to heal is different, as their bodies are made of cursed energy anyway, so all they have to do is use cursed energy to recreate their body. We also know from Gojo's explanation to Itadori in episode 6 that one can either blast pure cursed energy from themselves or pour it instead into a technique that gives it specific and often unique properties. This basically means that using reverse cursed energy without a technique is effectively a way of healing oneself or others, but the positive cursed energy could also be filtered through a technique to achieve a different effect. So, seeing as how an amplified limitless creates what is essentially an attraction force by creating a hole in reality that the surrounding reality rushes to fill in, pulling things together, then it makes sense that the reversal of that technique would instead create reality, or really just raw energy, that instead pushes things away from its origin point. Interestingly, hollow technique is achieved by combining the 2 into purple, which Gojo says brings forth an imaginary mass. Based on what we've seen of how it works in episode 20, and in this episode, I would say that it most likely works on the idea that the giant ball it conjures forth is effectively a no reality allowed zone, hence the use of the term imaginary, and just straight up deletes anything it comes into contact with, while also swirling and pulling things in, which may be an after effect of blue. Of course, as I mentioned previously, a lot of this doesn't necessarily hold up to in-depth scrutiny, but damn if it isn't badass. Next, let's look at the pages between these chapters in the manga. After chapter 73, we get a page explaining that the reason Geto's absorption of Fushigado's storage spirit fails is due to the presence of a master-servant relationship between the spirit and Fushigado. It mentions that what happens next becomes apparent in Volume 0, which was animated into the movie. In that, we learn that Geto intends to kill Yuta in order to take Rika from him, probably because he learned from his experience here that a cursed spirit that already has a strong relationship with someone would be able to repel his curse manipulation. So he'd have to kill the owner of the the cursed spirit first in order to take it. Also, in this episode, we saw as the spirit made its way to Geto as it was dying, and we see in the movie that he has the curse, since he uses it to equip Playful Cloud while he's fighting Okotsu. So the comment about Volume 0 is probably also referring to that as well. Akutami also mentions that he thought that Fushiguro let the Kuchisake Onna down a little easy at first, but decided it fit because he's a pro at freeloading off of women. After Chapter 74, we get a small little joke skit about how Gojo wanted to include 3 different phrasings of Fushiguro being right in his pre-battle rant. Finally, after Chapter 75, we get a page explaining that the chain Fushiguro used is known as the Chain of 1,000 Miles, and that it's effectively an infinite chain that only remains infinite as long as no one can see the other side of the chain. Kinda harkening back to the classic magical thinking we all tend to have when we're kids about things not being there or not ending if we don't see them. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on the story implications of finally finding out just how Gojo came to take Megumi in. Having defeated his father, he tells Gojo about Megumi and lets him decide what to do. In this way, it's serendipitous that Gojo and Fushiguro happen to have the same kind of distaste for the established Jujutsu world. They just happen to have incredibly different ways of going about acting on that distaste. Fushiguro endeavored simply to live his own life free of them, but deep down held a distaste for his clan and the establishment to such a degree that it led to his death when he attempted to make a statement by crushing Gojo, who represented the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery. Meanwhile, Gojo endeavored to act on his distaste by planning to protect Riko and fight Tengen-sama if necessary, and later as an adult secures a position as a teacher in order to act as a subversive influence on the next generation of sorcerers. Interestingly, this makes it seem as though that Gojo initially intended to rebel in the same way Fushiguro did, through strength and might, but after defeating him and coming to understand him better through his investigation into Megumi, he realizes it's smarter to go about his rebellion in a different way. Effectively, Fushiguro embodies the idea of changing the Jujutsu world from the outside by attempting to crush it with overwhelming strength, which fits perfectly as he is a character who was most likely ostracized from the Zenin clan for his lack of an innate technique, much like Maki, but was extremely strong nonetheless. Gojo, on the other hand, comes to embody the idea of changing the Jujutsu world quietly from within, by maintaining a position of influence and undermining the higher-ups, which fits perfectly as he is a character who was hailed as a child prodigy and considered by many to be the greatest living Jujutsu sorcerer from a young age, which is effectively the exact opposite of being ostracized. It's this desire to undermine the Jujutsu governors that motivates Gojo to take in Megumi and raise him into a fine young sorcerer, to effectively be his protege. While Gojo has been shown to be a hothead and a bit of a troublemaker prior to this, I think him taking Megumi in is an example of his first calculated, thought-out action to take steps against the established order of the Jujutsu world, and his disagreement with the mission to merge Riko with Tengen-sama is probably the first instance of him outright being so disgusted by what the Jujutsu higher-ups have created that he wants to rebel against it. Something I find so interesting about this series is how so many characters have these lofty ideas about what the Jujutsu world should be like or should do, and these differences of opinion or goal are what drives a lot of the conflict. Of course, there are still characters who have much narrower-minded or selfish viewpoints, but you'll notice these characters often don't last long before being thoroughly defeated or outright killed, which I think is Akutami's way of subtly implying that people who are narrow-minded like that tend to miss important things that lead to their downfall or misfortune, while the dreamers and big thinkers are the ones who keep their eyes open enough to see everything and keep themselves alive. This is why the characters seem to be so interesting, because while everyone from the lofty idealists to the selfish scrapers by are represented, it's the lofty idealists who stick around and become major protagonists or antagonists, while those that just are interested in bare-bones selfish survival often take a backseat frequently or dip out of the story entirely after a short period of time. Of course, there are characters who are shown to be idealists who don't survive, and those are the characters that inject tragedy into the story and keep you on your toes so you don't feel like you can accurately predict what's going to happen next at any given time. Anyway, that's my episode recap and story analysis for the 4th episode of the new season of Jujutsu Kaisen. Make sure to subscribe and turn on bell notifications if you want to be here as soon as possible each week as I put out new videos for each episode as it airs, and feel free to drop a comment with suggestions as to other videos you might like to see, such as character analysis videos or explanations. Thanks for watching.